We often hear about certain skills, right? Yeah, how some seem naturally suited to, well, one group over another.
Hmm.
And spatial ability, that, knack for picturing and moving objects around in your head, it's long been talked about like that.
Yeah, especially when people talk about STEM fields, science, technology.
Exactly. And you've probably heard the idea that men, on average, tend to score higher, particularly on things like mental rotation tasks.
Right. That's often cited as the kind of prime example.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into some really fascinating research that's actually starting to challenge those pretty long-held beliefs.
Okay.
We're unpacking a critical review called Gender Differences in Spatial Ability, a critical review. It's from the Educational Psychology Review.
Got it.
And our goal is really just to understand the current thinking on this. What does it all mean for how we understand cognitive abilities?
Sounds good, because that traditional view, the one that's been dominant for a while, it really hammers home this idea of a significant gender difference, specifically in mental rotation, imagining an object turning in 3D space.
Right, the classic example.
And that's supposedly where men show the biggest advantage. This view got a lot of backing from meta-analyses.
Which combined results from lots of studies, yeah.
Exactly. And they consistently showed men scoring higher on specific tests, especially the mental rotation test, the MRT.
Okay, so the MRT became the sort of go-to proof for this idea that men are, I guess, inherently better at mentally juggling shapes.
That was definitely the prevailing narrative for years.
But like we do here on the deep dive, we want to look a bit closer.
Mm-hmm.
And this review we're looking at today, it takes a pretty big swing at that whole picture.
Okay.
It highlights some more recent work suggesting that the MRT itself, well, it might not even be a valid way to measure mental rotation ability.
Exactly. Which is a pretty big claim, considering how widely it's been used.
Huge.
But the critique actually goes deeper than just questioning one test. Yeah, the review makes a much broader point, maybe even more surprising,
Which is?
that our very understanding, our definition of spatial ability, might not be neutral.
Not neutral. How so?
They argue that the construct of spatial ability has been, and this is their term, co-constructed with gender.
Co-constructed with gender. Okay, let's unpack that. Sounds
Right.
like our ideas about gender might have influenced how we even defined this skill.
Precisely. That's the core idea. Our beliefs about what men and women are sort of naturally good at, they might have shaped how we identified, defined, and crucially measured spatial skills.
Hmm.
Think about it historically. When people talked about spatial ability, it was almost always linked to fields dominated by men, right?
Yeah.
Engineering, architecture, physics.
Sure, those come to mind first.
But if you stop and think, spatial reasoning is critical in loads of other areas. Some are fields often seen as more feminized.
Like what? Can you give an example?
Well, think about a surgeon navigating complex anatomy,
Okay, yeah.
or a choreographer planning movements on a stage, or even someone, say, knitting a really complex pattern from instructions.
Ah, I see. Those definitely require visualizing things in space, manipulating patterns.
Absolutely. Significant spatial intelligence, but perhaps not the kind traditionally tested or valued in the same way.
So we tend to pigeonhole skills with professions and then professions with genders. This review is saying that bias might have crept into the very definition of spatial ability.
That's the argument, that these embedded beliefs led us to focus on certain types of spatial tasks, the ones associated with male-dominated fields, and perhaps undervalue or overlook others.
Right.
And this leads to a really provocative idea in the review.
Yeah.
Because of this long-held association of spatial skill with men, the author suggests that maybe some researchers, maybe unconsciously, selectively bred the assessment tools.
Selectively bred. Wow. Okay, like choosing plants for specific traits. What does that mean for cognitive tests?
The argument is essentially that there might have been a tendency over time to develop and favor tests that happen to show larger gender differences.
So the goal wasn't necessarily pure measurement of a skill, but finding tools that confirmed an existing belief.
That's the potential issue they raise. Maybe the aim, consciously or not, shifting towards maximizing the observed difference, rather than accurately measuring a specific underlying spatial capacity.
And they single out the MRT as potentially one of these selectively bred instruments.
Yes, they argue it fits this pattern.
That's a serious charge against such a widely used test.
Hmm.
What's the consequence, then, if the MRT was developed or selected in that way?
Well, the major consequence, according to this review, is pretty stark.
Yeah.
If these tools were shaped to maximize gender differences, then they might not actually be valid for assessing genuine underlying ability differences between groups.
So the scores might just reflect the test's built-in bias.
Exactly. Rather than reflecting a true difference in, say, mental rotation skill itself, it could be an artifact of the measurement tool.
That really flips the script on decades of research, doesn't it?
It certainly calls a lot of conclusions into question.
If the main tool used to show the difference was potentially skewed.
Wow. Precisely. And building on that, the review also tackles the common assumption about why these differences might exist.
You mean the biological or evolutionary explanations? Hormones, hunter-gatherer theories, that sort of thing?
Yeah, those ideas. The authors are pretty direct here. They state that the current empirical evidence, well, it just doesn't strongly support those biological or evolutionary causes for sex differences and spatial ability.
Really? Because those explanations are quite popular. You hear them a lot.
They are popular, but the review argues the hard evidence backing them up is lacking.
Okay, so if it's probably not biology, and the tests themselves might be problematic, what explanation does this review favor for the patterns we see?
They circle back to their main thesis, that co-construction of gender and spatial ability.
Right.
They propose this framework as a better explanation. It emphasizes things like societal beliefs, cultural expectations, and also the different experiences and opportunities people have. These factors are likely much more significant in shaping performance on spatial tasks.
So it's less about innate brain differences and more about nurture, environment, cultural framing, and maybe biased measurement.
That's the essence of their argument, yes.
Yeah.
How we frame the skill culturally, the different paths people take in developing it, combined with potential issues in assessment. And based on all this, the review does offer some recommendations for how spatial researchers should move forward.
What kind of things?
Well, without getting into all the specifics, the general thrust is towards adopting a much more critical perspective, re-examining basic assumptions, diversifying measurement tools, considering context much more carefully, that sort of thing.
This is a really significant shift in perspective. Let me try to recap.
Go for it.
We started with this idea. Men seem better at spatial stuff, especially mental rotation, proven by the MRT. Pretty clear, right?
That was the standard story.
But this review throws serious doubt on that.
Yeah.
It suggests, one, the MRT might not be a clean measure anyway. Two, our whole concept of spatial ability might be tangled up with gender stereotypes from the get-go.
The co-construction idea, yeah.
And three, the biological or evolutionary explanations. Maybe not much solid evidence there.
That captures the core points really well. It moves from a seemingly straightforward biological difference measured by objective tests to a much more complex picture where culture, experience, and even the research tools themselves are deeply intertwined with gender beliefs.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it, if our understanding of something like spatial ability could be shaped like this. What about other cognitive abilities? Could our ideas about, say, verbal skills or mathematical reasoning or emotional intelligence also be influenced by these kinds of societal constructs?
That is a really profound question to ask. Are we measuring innate differences, or are we sometimes measuring the effects of our own assumptions and societal structures? This deep dive into just this one critical review really highlights something crucial, I think.
What's that?
The importance of constantly critically looking at even findings we think are totally settled.
Right. Not taking things at face value.
Especially in research, we have to stay aware of how our underlying assumptions, our biases, might be shaping the questions we ask and the answers we find, particularly when dealing with group comparisons.
Absolutely. Well, if this discussion got you thinking, we definitely recommend checking out the source itself.
Yeah, the full review has much more detail.
It's Gender Differences in Spatial Ability, a critical review, an educational psychology review. It really digs into the arguments and lays out those recommendations for researchers.
It's a strong reminder that questioning the foundations, even of established ideas, can lead to some really important, maybe even necessary shifts in understanding.
A really thought-provoking piece.